the order in nature can't be deduced by any sort of logic, but it can only be discovered by examination.
Mhm.
And this comes from the idea that God in his free will could have created in any way, in many different ways. And we can't just deduce that from any sort of logic. We have to go into nature and see what he actually did. And this is summarized nicely by a statement of Descartes in his discourse on the method, which translated into English is God might have arranged these things in countless different ways. Which way he chose rather than the rest, we must find by observation.
Hence science, right?
Yep.
The scientific pursuit, studying nature to figure out how it works, how it's done, the mechanisms, and so forth. Now, thanks to a wave of scientific materialism over the last 3 centuries, and in particular, the pernicious myth that science and religion are at odds or at war, many scientists feel the pressure to adopt a view known as methodological naturalism, or MN for short. Tell us what that means and why it's bad for science.
Methodological naturalism is the view that when we do science, we must commit absolutely to the belief that the material realm is complete, that there can be no incompleteness, no input of information from outside the universe or the natural realm. So it's fine to conclude design if the information comes from within the universe, such as in the example of the car that I mentioned earlier. But this view forbids the possibility that information might come from outside the natural realm. And in my view, this is bad for science because if it's adopted, then the data of science are no longer the arbiter.
Hmm.
In fact, the data of science become irrelevant. The data that bear on the question of design become irrelevant. No amount of evidence could ever be enough to conclude design. So science then becomes is no longer a search for the truth. It becomes a tool to support materialistic philosophy. And I think science should be an unbiased search for the truth.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great breakdown of methodological naturalism and the dangers it poses. Okay, well, let's jump back into reviewing the discoveries that you've gathered together. You've made a series of videos. You're actually still working on them, so we'll come back and talk about more in the future. But the ones that you've put out, review all this evidence that has been put out and is now available, but that not enough people know about. So let's jump back into that. When we move from cosmology to biology, we encounter information in the form of proteins. What is protein sequence space, and why did mathematicians recognize early that this space is too large to be searched?
So proteins are chains of amino acids, small molecules called amino acids, and there are 20 natural amino acids. When it was discovered that natural proteins can be several hundred amino acids long or even greater, it was immediately clear that the space of possibilities was far too large to be searched. In the bacterial species E. coli, the average length for enzymes is about 300 to 400 amino acids. And each amino acid can be any of the 20. So for a protein with 300 amino acids, there are 20 to the 300 power possibilities. And that number is just inconceivably great. To put that number in perspective, it's estimated that there's something like 10 to the 80th power protons in the observable universe. And so that the 10 to the 300 is much, much larger than that. So from the middle of the last century, it's been clear that the really important question is what fraction of sequences is functional? Because if say 10%, 1 out of 10 random sequences is functional, then functional sequences can easily be found by chance, and it's not necessary to search a large fraction of the sequence space.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really want to make sure people kind of grasp these numbers and this mathematical problem. Uh, Stephen Meyer likes to show this bike lock, um, and this is akin to a bike lock with what 70, 80 entries, and you've got to guess every one, and it just becomes a vanishingly small probability. And this is where we talk about the mathematical challenges to Darwinism, isn't it?
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Yeah, and the everyday Joe and Jane might not understand the idea of sequence space, but we're talking about if a Darwinist approach is accurate, it means it has to search a space of possibilities to build something functional, right? Isn't that kind of what we're saying here? And you're saying that the numbers are just vanishingly small, that blind process will be able to find what is necessary to build a functional protein.
Yeah, so it's unambiguous that the sequence space is too large to be searched. That's very clear.
Yeah.
However, it was not clear early on what fraction of sequences, random sequences, would be useful. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was the important question. And so there are three approaches that scientists have used to try to answer that question.
Okay.
And the first one is called the forward approach, and that probably is the first thing that comes to your mind. Just make a bunch of sequences and see if they fold or do something useful biologically.
Mm.
However, the method can really only be used for very short sequences because the numbers are so large. And so it's not really appropriate for large domain proteins such as typical enzymes. So the second approach is called the reverse approach. And in that approach, you start with a folded sequence, a folded protein, and then a portion of that sequence is mutated systematically, and the investigator looks to see how many of the mutated sequences remain folded. And then they apply the observed statistics over the whole entire length of the protein. Now, the third method that has become possible recently is to analyze existing known sequences of proteins in the protein data bank, sequences that are known to fold. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is a bioinformatics approach.
Hmm.
The second approach was pioneered by a protein scientist named Robert Sauer at MIT. And he published the results of the first study of this type in 1990 and reported that for a protein of, of 92 amino acids, so that's a pretty short protein, only one sequence out of 10 to the 63rd power would adopt that fold.
Hmm.
So it's a really small fraction.
Yeah.
And then Doug Axe followed up on this work by making some improvements to the method and reported his results in the Journal of Molecular Biology in 2004. And he found that for a protein of 153 amino acids, which is larger than the protein in the study of Sauer, but still much shorter than a typical enzyme in E. coli,
Mm-hmm.
his results indicated that only one sequence out of 10 to the 77th would fold.
Wow.
Now, interestingly, results from the third approach were reported in 2017 in a paper in the Biophysical Journal. And this is a completely independent method. And the group examined 10 proteins with common single domain folds, and for which a large amount of variable sequence data is available. And they reported that for proteins with between 120 and 180 amino acids, which are still shorter than the average enzyme in E. coli, the fraction that adopt each type of fold for all cases is much less than 1 in 10 to the 100th power. So the results are very clear. These functional sequences are vanishingly rare.